Hello and welcome to the Chapel Art Spoken Word. Our guest today is Sue and she's going to read her story that won the Chapel Art Short Story Competition in 2020. The theme was stars. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Simone. So, stars. I shot a man once, dead. There in front of me, I killed a man, under the stars. Have you ever been scared? No, really scared. My granddaughter used to say about some daft film, it was great, I was so scared. And as I started to open my mouth, my wife would give me that look. A look that sometimes prompted a fleeting thought that perhaps Hans should have lived instead of me, that he'd have made a better job of his life than I had of mine. I called him Hans. I started to dream about him almost immediately after it happened. It was during the war and I'd been shot down that night. I knew I needed to shelter to find safety. That meant leaving the cover of the sparse trees and scampering across the ravaged field to the burned out farmhouse. It had been such a beautiful night for flying. The moon was up and the stars were magical, sparkling. This will sound silly, but it was almost as though the stars were singing and dancing in front of me as I flew that Lancaster. Crossing the channel, I almost felt happy, that strangled feeling in my stomach nearly gone, and for once I thought our sortie could go well. I might see daylight again. I never told anybody, not in the prisoner of war camp, and once I was home, no one wanted to hear. It must have been hard, lad, my old dad said, and I agreed, and that was that. I don't know what to think when they talk about, what's that thing, post-traumatic stress. Everybody seems to want to discuss their feelings nowadays. Still, I suppose I've no room to talk. I'm not sure when I started chatting to Hans. One day something shocking on the wireless made me say out loud, "Well, Hans, what do you think of that?" It was usually big events that set me off. 1966 World Cup, the Cold War, a united Germany, 9/11, or even the news that Marx was to shut in the high street. And then when no one was around, I'd chat and feel the release of sharing my thoughts with him. My sleep was always pixelated with dreams of Hans. Once I dreamt we were about to take fire at each other, but a butterfly fluttered by. In perfect English, he said, "It's a viceroy." "No," I chided him, "it's a monarch." And he'd laughed and said delightedly, "You're a lepidopterist too." Then we put our guns down and sat on the grimy wooden floor and discussed butterflies. I wouldn't have minded, but I know nothing about butterflies. The only person I was ever tempted to tell what happened that night was my grandson, Mac. I loved that boy. He was never lovable, not even as a child. His face was always contorted in a grimace, and his acne is still fierce. A man now, but he's never really cracked what life is about. Years ago, his mum sent him round to put in a light bulb. Talk about unwilling. He slunk in and grunted, "All right." I put the bulb on the dressing table with the chair next to it. I reckoned it would take him 5 minutes and then he'd be free to go home. But once the light was back on, he muttered. I had to ask him to repeat himself. "Have you still got that telescope upstairs?" I have." And I paused whilst I tried to work out what he was thinking. Then I chanced it. "I don't suppose you'll check it works for me." "Suppose so." Would you believe it? We set it up and gazed into the sky together. After a while, he muttered, "Got any custard creams?" "Son, you're in luck, I have. Hold on, I'll get a cuppa to go with them." "Oh, don't bother, I'll go." Off he gracelessly went. When he came back, we sat in silence enjoying the cuppa and dunking our biscuits, and I wanted to tell him. I'm not sure why. Just then I was closer to him than anyone else I've ever known. Then he said, "I'm going for a piss," and the moment went. How did I get onto that? I was telling you about that night. I'd have given anything for the sky to cloud over, to give me cover. Who knew what was out there? My head felt full of cotton wool. I could feel a vein pounding in my neck. My pulse was startlingly fast, my heart fluttering. Under the star-filled sky, I edged towards the building. If I could get through the door that was hanging off its hinges, I thought that I might have a chance. My heart had come to life and pounded painfully as I dashed to the door. With my revolver in my hand, I spun round the opening. The roof was missing, and there he was, illuminated under the stars. We both stared at one another and then together instinctively raised our hands. Bang, bullseye, and as he slumped wordlessly to the ground, I felt a warm trickle down my legs. Why am I telling you this now? I'm getting on, as my daughter keeps saying. Increasingly during the long nights when I gaze at the stars, I wonder what awaits me. I've told her I want on my headstone, at peace now, under the stars. And I can only hope, because you see, Hans has never left me. So what is coming may be as much a release for him as it will be for me. I shot a man once, killed him under the stars. But like the stars above, he's always there, sometimes hidden, but always there, waiting.
Wow, thank you, Sue.
Thanks.
Lovely story, very poignant. Yeah, really love it. Where did the idea for the story come from?
Well, strangely enough, I remember as a child, my father used to tell me stories at night. And one of the stories was completely out of character. He was telling me that he had, when he was in the army, he'd gone into a building and it was the same scenario. He'd shot somebody. And it was such a strange story because it was so out of character for him, who was such a gentle person, that it's always stayed with me. And how do you live with something like that? You know, and it obviously had played on his mind. So that's how that gave me the germ of a story. And you know, unfortunately, he's no longer here for me to check it out with him. But I mean, it must be the same for so many people. And of course, it's how people struggle, isn't it? Once they come back from any kind of a war.
And like you mentioned in the story, there was no, you know, no way in those days, the post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, just wasn't recognised, was it? So
exactly, they just had to get on with it, didn't they? It was, and you didn't talk about your feelings, especially up north. It would be the last thing you'd want to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much again for taking the time to share your story with us. And that story will be on the Chapel Arts website in the Word format for people to read as well. And thank you very much again.
Thank you, Simone. Good night.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, over to you.
Okay. Triumph of Science Through the Eyes of an Admirer. We were just back from our holidays in Morocco and still had a couple of days to spend in London. I decided to pay a visit to the Francis Crick Centre near King's Cross Station, a place I have heard so much about. Given that it had opened only 3 years before, the place had already gone into full gear of functionality, a tremendous feat for a science organization of its size and complexity. A modern glass-paneled, 8-storied structure with further 5 levels underground, it houses 1,500 scientists and medics, all in their prime, engaged in some of the groundbreaking researches in the field of biomedicine. Scientists drawn from diverse specialties like immunology, genetics, cancer, have come together to work under one roof, with only glass walls separating their areas, but sharing a common information system known as bioinformatics. The degree of collaborative research under this roof is unbelievable. A lot of space has been given to cafeterias, coffee bars, and open sitting lounges, allowing occupants just to mill around and engage with each other. This is a very good way to help cross-fertilization of ideas, and hence a low-hanging fruit for the IT companies. I, even as an outsider, felt the intellectual air all around me. I can understand how these young scientists get sucked into this environment and spend hours on end totally oblivious of the world outside. The institution is in the Premier League of scientific stroke medical institutions in the world. It's the equivalent of NIH, Bethesda, in the United States. It is quite aptly named after Sir Francis Crick, discoverer of the DNA, father of molecular medicine, and recipient of the Nobel Prize in 1963. While I was sat in the foyer, I went through the brochures lying on the table. Crick graduated the year my mother was born, 1937. Initially trained as a physicist, but then changed direction. Working together with an American scientist, Watson, he went on to make the big discovery. The brochure displayed a picture of the letter he wrote to his son, outlining his vision of what the future molecule of DNA would look like. At that time, the nucleosides were yet to be identified. In that letter, he anointed these molecules with A, C, T, and G. What a scientific foresight. Dina, a young mother, doctor, and a researcher, took me around. The space for work for individuals is tiny, only enough to house a desk, a computer, a swivel chair, also used to hang a coat, and a bench to conduct her experiment. What a contrast with what we, the district hospital consultants, were used to. A room, a desk, a pile of notes on the table, and shelves stacked with books and journals, the latter more to create impression than being looked into. When I was a consultant, I had 15 young ladies running around me typing my letters. Gone are those days. The world is now virtual and instant. Dina took me around to see a fax machine, which I have heard so much about. My son wrote his PhD using this machine. To a layperson, it's a cell separator using antibodies and a fluorescent dye. Sounds so simple in description, but such a huge milestone in shaping up modern immunology. The institute is very unique. Its sponsors include Cancer Research, Medical Research Council, and some of the London teaching hospitals. The director is Sir Paul Nurse, a man who won the Nobel Prize in 2002. I remember attending his talk at Manchester Medical School on protein cycling. Not even 2 decades have passed before anti-cycling drugs against metastatic breast cancer have become available. Such is the speed of translation from a scientific discovery to a treatment reality. Lately, we saw how quickly the genome of coronavirus got decoded and how instantly vaccine development got into an immediate kickstart. Hadrian Haywood is another name I picked up from the brochure. My son has collaborated with him in his research and publication. He is famous for his discovery in identifying the link between gamma delta cells and cancer. The first time I heard the names of these cells was when I was a junior doctor at Stepping Hill Hospital. Professor Marshall of Hope Hospital, our next door neighbor, was using these cells in rectal biopsy samples as a marker of return of celiac disease. I could not notice the name of Sonia Gandhi, a name I would normally associate with Indian politics, a lady only in her early 30s doing pioneering work on how proteins fold and how it is linked with cell death. As the Human Genome Project comes to a close, it has managed to open up so many new windows. I can see how in the coming years, more and more diseases are going to be characterized by the genomics, transcriptomics, and proteomics, and less by phenotypic expressions. Medical textbooks of tomorrow will be so much different from what they are today. The molecular revolution is beginning to provide rich harvests in terms of treatment options. I remember some 35 years ago, following years of collaborative research between a scientist and rheumatologist, infliximab, a monoclonal antibody against rheumatoid arthritis, was identified. I saw a television clip some 30 years ago, a lady walking out, a lady with disabling rheumatoid arthritis, walking out of the hospital only after a few infusions. The march of discovery has since continued. Later discoveries have progressed to include antibodies against kinases, messenger proteins, cyclines, and finally gene blockers for the RNAs. As a retired physician, I tend to reflect on what I see around, using my wisdom as my only tool. My head bows automatically to the millions of scientists all over the world, often faceless and little known soldiers. Their contribution to the comforts we all enjoy as mankind as a whole cannot be overstated. Whilst the forces of nationalism pull us apart, those of science work in the reverse, bringing the world together. A visit to this hallowed place, a temple, brought home this truth with all intensity. I'm sorry it was a bit too technical. There were a lot of scientific words and medical jargon.
I'm sure Mark will have got all those.
It was brilliant. I have never been in the Francis Crick Centre, but that really evoked it. Yes.
It's a place worth visiting, Mark, even if you see it from outside.
Yeah.
All you have to do is just, you can walk inside, sit in the foyer, and because everything is glass paneled, you can see through everything.
Yeah.
And if somebody takes you around, it's even better.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, I'd love that. Yes.
Whereabouts is that, Dave?
It's opposite King's Cross station,
Right.
London.
Yeah.
To remember that next time we're in London.
I think one thing, Dave, that might have thrown people off the track is your mention of the fax machine. And it's
Yes.
not an FAX machine, it's an FACS machine.
That's right.
Which stands for a fluorescent antibody cell sorter.
Yeah.
But, okay.
So if you if you visit King's Cross Hospital, on your left is the British Library.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And on your right will be this institute. So it will be 2 for the price of 1.
Oh, yes. Yes, worth going across over to King's Cross. Yes.
Well, Pippa visited the British Library, didn't you, Pippa?
Yes, I did go to the British Library looking for Simone's book, amongst other things. But I just loved the British Library. It was like a day out at the fair or something for me. Absolutely adored it. And I didn't know about this medical place, but that was fascinating. And my father, actually, he did a lot on cancer drugs and fluoxetine and all that. And he was a research chemist that collaborated with the medics. So that was really nice for me to hear. Although he's passed away now, he was massively into collaborating with medics and making anti-cancer drugs. So that was wonderful. Thank you very much.
And Pippa sounds like she should have my backdrop because she sounds like she's speaking from another planet. And for those who maybe, I don't know whether Tony would have come across this, but when you when your book goes into publication, you actually have to give the library 6 copies of your book.
You can choose to do that, and to be honest, I didn't choose to do that.
Well, I didn't have any choice, Tony. I'm quite annoyed.
I can't answer the question. I mean, publishers have done that sort of thing, and and how many copies they give, I don't know.
Well, but when you self-publish, they have to obviously tell you what they're doing, and they
Yes, sir, yes.
the six have to go. So unfortunately, when Pippa went, she could see the listing, but you couldn't access the books on that day, could you? There was some. It has to be on certain days, I think. I think Pippa was there at a weekend. So I shall definitely have to go. Must be amazing, that. All those books.
If I can make another point, Simone, about the scientists.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the Queen's honors, any year, yeah, there are only a handful of scientists who get recognition.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to the politicians and the administrative people and, other walks of life, I mean, look at the contribution science has made to our lives, Today, we are now in the middle of a lockdown. Who is bailing us out?
Well, I should think that after this last 12 months, Dave, that might change.
Absolutely. I think scientists should get more recognition, and they should, yeah. And often these are sort of, people who are working behind closed doors, totally disabled, and they're not sort of caring for their personal appearance. And yet they make so much of contribution to, the way we lead our lives.
That's it. Okay, so I'm going to draw the first part of the meeting to a close. So welcome to the Chapel Art Spoken Word evening. I am going to read my summary of events in December, which I've written as a poem. So I'll just get that on the screen. And this all seemed, when I was reading it out the other day, like a long time ago, December 2020. We came out of lockdown and back to tears. Forget any Christmas parties and good cheers. The first COVID vaccine was given to Margaret Keenan, but COVID-19 was proving to be a demon. A new strain appeared in the southeast and London, causing concern and a huge conundrum. So a new tier 4 was created, leaving Christmas plans somewhat deflated. The festive 5-day period was reduced to 1, so everyone's plans had to be redone. The household bubbles were varied in each tier, and the supermarkets were running short on beer. The new COVID strain made the French react, causing lorries to be stacked. No warning of the French action caused a furore and panic buying again on the shop floor. The powers that be suggested some solutions to get things moving for distributions. Set up a system for COVID testing. Who'd have thought it? With food, water and a loo for those who needed to emit. The queuing could be seen as a practice run for the exit from Europe, which was nearly done. With trade deals still in the air, would it boil down to fishing rights in La Mer? The antics of Trump were rumbling on, still convinced he'd really won. If I lost, I'd be a gracious loser, says he. His continuous denial a travesty. Some places had snow on Christmas Day, and enough a couple of days later to go and play. We ended the year with Storm Bella. It was far too windy for the umbrella. The Oxford vaccine was approved in the UK, easier to store so vaccinations could get underway. Boris clinched a deal at the 11th hour. How would the UK fare now it had its own power? That was 2020, December. A lot's happened since then.
Yes. It's a historical document now at the moment.
I'm quite enjoying them.
Yeah.
Makes me write something down every day, and just need to try and get January's done before I forget what's happened. Mark.
Right. The novel is called Black Harry.
Black Harry?
Yeah. Okay. We'll start with Glossopdale, April 1570. He come over Brownab on St. Alpheus Day, an hour after sun were up, bossing the skyline like a moorland rock with ravens on it. Old Tom Jackson and me wondered at first who we were and what we were doing stood there. Other men were asking and all. Happening we're watching birds, larks sprinkling valley with song. Swallows come out of their winter sleep under water to dance in morning air. curlews sorrowing over their customary lands. Then he comes striding downhill, and I knew him. Black tangle of hair and beard, restless shoulders, bowed legs, ash staff an ell long, pack on his shoulder, purse heavy on his belt. Old Tom frowned. Not Harry Botham's lad, is it? Aye, I said. There were 3 youths from Tunel and Whitfield with us, shouting and scrapping and throwing one another, and they stared at Black Harry marching downhill and reckoned they could throw him and all. Made me laugh. Similarly man like me, Black Harry, only a fortnight older. He were born on a Thursday, me on a Friday. Hadn't seen him in nigh on 8 year. When he were a furlong away, I limped up to meet him. Speedwell and Dog Violet smiled, and Yellow Archangel shone. Yesterday's rain were cutting its own gutter down middle of track. Lads behind me were still going on about how they could take him. Men were muttering, favours his mother, gypsy whore. Folk had talked same road about Harry's mother for as long as I could remember. Diced old Harry into jumping broom so she could get her hands on Storth. 5 kids, Black Harry and 2 girls and 2 what died. Then she were gone, back to her gypsy folk. Old Harry's never took another wife. I was sick of hearing it. Black Harry's mother weren't no gypsy, and I reckoned they'd best not badmouth her when Harry could hear. If he hadn't gone soft in 8 year he'd been away in service, they'd break their heads or rip their tongues out. His dad were done the same, only he's old now. I clasped his arms and shouted, "Hey up, Harry lad." He nodded. Tom Booth, Spider-Legs Tom. All right, Tom. His mouth did that sideways shift it used to do when we were nippers. Him smiling that shift. Looked like he kept all his teeth. And that scar over his left eye. I blinked, run my wrist over my nose. Aye, I said. How were Ashford? He shook his head. Met folk from Ashford, but I weren't a servant there. I were in Castleton, and then Peak Forest. Different soil here, better corn. Then I were off south and west. That were different again. I was sure he'd said 8 year back he'd be in service in Ashford. Mind, I don't always remember right. None of us does. Easier work? I asked. Further south it were. Rest of Peak were as hard as here. Folk in Castleton spend half the time digging lead. Old uns get bellanded. Folk are same everywhere though. They all smell of shit and onions. I laughed. I were a bit choked. What's stock like in Castleton and Peak Forest? Same sheep and beasts, Spider-Legs. Same landlord and all. He stared past me. I see Tom Jackson still above ground. Who's yon lad he's propping up? It were all right Harry calling me Spider-Legs, same as he always had. I didn't like other folk doing it. Malachi Lummus. Remember his dad, Charlie, as were nobbed 11pence and shilling? Died while we were in service. Malachi's got leasehold for Herod now. Needs help, mind. I've been back nobbed 3 weeks, but I knew Malachi couldn't do a lot. Talked to his sheep. Talked to rocks and all, and his sister, and folk as weren't there, and none of them couldn't answer. Fairies had his wits most of the time. Sister turned to her hair o' nights, and her lips stayed same come daylight. Coney, they called her. She were magic at curing sick sheep and beasts, Coney were, and her bees lived on heather and made best honey in Glossopdale. Best for sweetening food, best for covering wounds. Where them bees thrived, you knew there weren't no blasphemy or sacrilege up at Herod. Anyway, there couldn't be. Coney couldn't talk, and Malachi couldn't much neither. Harry looked up yon wastes where we'd seen headless women and boggarts when we were nippers. Not much grew up there because it were devil's ground. Land were dead. Happen innocent blood had been shed on it, time out of memory of man. But Lord Shrewsbury were enclosing chunks of it, charcoal streaks of stone wall across them withered heights of bracken and heather, golden plovers and peat. Same landlord. Old folk said he'd done good, his lordship, with 3 sheep for everyone that'd been in Abbey times. There was still snow up yonder, white as old Maggie Dawson's hair. It weren't going to shift while turned St. Mark's Eve, after Maggie had spent her night in Church Port seeing who'd die in Glossop Parish over 12 months coming. Same every year. While God were blessing land with new life, promising eternity to come after resurrection, cunning men and wise women were seeing them as death were bound to come for. Harry asked, "Where were you in service, Spiderlegs?" "Yorkshire to start with, other side Settle, Ma's cousin. Then Hull way, and then back this road near Barnsley. Been home again since Lady Day. Seen bad things this past year, Harry." "Heard tales. Troubles didn't get down here, not them sort, any road." He sounded sorry he'd missed them. We set off downhill, splashing through wet and crushing flowers, and he slowed his steps for me. Flowers would pick themselves up again when we'd gone. I told him about them Catholic earls running off to Scotland when Earl of Sussex's army chased them out of Yorkshire. Queen won't let folk worship now they want no more, not after that do. Ordered one man hanged in every village, 700 they reckon, and none wanted to follow them papist earls. Swung till they rotted and crows had them, that's all one or two. I shook my head. Never rains but it pours. Harry snorted. 700? My arse, there were that many. And does Queen think a few hang things will stop fools wanting the Bishop of Rome back? Well, they reckon Bishop of Rome like. He said anybody who's murdered Queen will have his blessing. Old Tom Jackson and the men were watching us. Harry nodded. Them three lads who reckoned they could throw him started forwards. Only Harry grinned and lifted his staff. And they backed off, all three of them, and quick about it. "Who's vicar now?" he asked. "Still Rafe Bower?" We said, "Aye," and he laughed and spat. "That one'll never hang any road. Strong for reformed faith when I were a boy and Edward were king. First time folks saw priest wedded. Then Mary were queen, so he turned papist and hid his wife. And when Mary married yon poxy Spaniard and gave birth to a viper, and devil took her soul, and her sister were crowned, he went reformed faith again and brought his wife back. Was he now a Puritan?" We laughed, but old Tom said Harry shouldn't talk that world about vicar. Vicars couldn't be Puritans any road. Harry took no notice. We walked towards Storth and left old Tom and the rest of them muttering. Some didn't like Bothams.
Thank you, Mark. You can unmute for your applause.
Mark, did you say it's 1570? So Henry VIII. Time of Henry VIII.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Yes, Queen Elizabeth. She came to the throne in 1558.
It's a long time back.
Yes, I remember it well, though. Right.
A lot of research there, Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it's heavy research to write this book.
Mm. It's bad enough trying to research stuff that
How do you research the accent?
Listen, it's still essentially the local accent, and I use it for a lot of stories, a lot of the local stories. You know, you have to get people speaking. You've got to be able to simulate the voice. So I've used that, but actually getting the voice of the narrator took quite a lot of effort, because that has to be maintained to be consistent throughout the story, which covers about 17, 18 years.
One of the things you mentioned in the story was boggarts, and that rang a bell with me, because where I lived with a small parish, it wasn't even a village centre, but there was a style, and my father who had sort of very much a countryman of the early 1900s, really. But every time we walked past it, he'd say, "That's the boggart style." And I wasn't quite certain what a boggart was. I think it's some type of gremlin or demon of some sort, but it's not what. It's not an expression I'd heard other than in Cheshire until you referred to it in Derbyshire.
Yeah, it's the word is used in different ways. Sometimes it is, as you say, some sort of gremlin, and sometimes it's just simply used as a word for a ghost.
I probably try not to meet one though.
I picked up on your bee bit.
Yes, yes. There are a lot of very strong beliefs around bees in Tudor times.
Right.
They don't thrive if there's blasphemy. Yeah. Or sacrilege.
Oh.
Which is, yeah. And of course, honey was essential. I mean, not only for sweetening things, because sugar was a very new commodity, and it was restricted entirely to the very rich, the upper classes. Which is why I mentioned Harry having good teeth, as the peasants tended to. They lost a few, but the teeth they had were strong and white. The aristocrats, the nobles, had rotten teeth. They went black, and they had foul breath because of all the sugar they ate. Which is a fascinating thing. But honey was used for sweetening, but it was also medicinal. And if you've got an injury, and of course injuries were commonplace in farming community, you put honey on it, seal it. It was an essential commodity.
Yeah, I think there was might have been a vet thing. I don't know whether it was in this country or not, but that they were putting some honey onto a wound.
Yeah, works. Yeah.
We've lost our bees.
Well, I won't ask why.
So I'm going to blame Chris.
Yes, blame Chris. That's right.
But before, so we've done the honey, taken the honey off, and obviously left some honey for them on the frames. But there's really funny little things because they're really, really clever. But when it comes to traveling in the hive, they've not found the honey that we'd left them.
Oh.
So we'd left them quite a lot of honey, but they've not. We've left it in the middle frames, I think. I can't remember, but they've not travelled up to find it. And nor did they go to the other supply that we'd put up higher up for them. So we'd done our sort of harvest, and I've come to the end of a jar that we'd harvested this year. Did a swap with Pete. So he had a jar of mine, I had a jar of his, and we only live a quarter of a mile away from each other, if that. Probably a quarter of a mile. And the taste is so different.
Well, what flowers have been collected?
So I think my bees go in Pete's direction, and I think Pete's bees come in my direction because it did taste a bit like that sort of heather. And we've got heathers in the garden. So
yes, and heather honey is very good.
Right, okay. Tony, you're next on this list.
Well, if you don't mind, can I do another drabble, because that's the basis of the book I'm trying to write, and then I could read the first 200 or so words of the introduction, and it should take about 4 minutes at most, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, this is drabble number 2. You die tonight, old woman, he snarled. Globules of molten hate spurted into her face. Why, she cried. In her eyes, he saw rage, but not fear. For the money, he laughed. Isn't it always the money? But it would all have been yours one day. I couldn't wait, Nana. Money's wasted on you. You need to be young to enjoy it. He plunged a knife into her chest, then bent down to hear her final words. She spat the deadly virus infecting her onto his lips. Greed is your undoing, she cackled, and death will be your only inheritance. Nice, funny opening line. And if this becomes a book, it may or may not become a book. The title so far is A Perfect Candidate. He picked up a pen and started to list her virtues. He knew from the outset that it would be a long list. She was intelligent and kind and pretty, except that pretty was the wrong word. It implied something ephemeral and maybe superficial, and that was far from the truth. When he looked at her picture, he could see that she had a timeless beauty and grace that would turn heads even in her later years. But sadly, he knew that she would not see any of those. By reputation, she was honest and hardworking and good. For many people in public life, concern, compassion, and sincerity were costumes chosen by consummate actors to manipulate the emotions of the mob. But in her case, they seemed like the real deal. Her private life appeared to be exemplary. A loving wife and mother, and a true and loyal friend. Try as he might, he could not find one person who had said a bad word against her. And even on the internet, where vicious trolls took delight in attacking others, her character remained untrashed. In order to add balance to his assessment, he tried to discover if there were hidden blemishes in her disposition others had overlooked, or events in her life that she hoped would be forever secret. But he could find none. He knew that perfection could not exist. But if it couldn't, then she was the nearest embodiment of it that anyone could imagine. He allowed himself a wry smile. He was sure now he had found his ideal candidate. Any man who could put an end to such a beautiful and blameless life had to be a monster capable of any atrocity. He had found his statement of intent, and after she was ferociously struck down, no person would doubt for an instant that her killer would not carry out any threat he uttered.
Yeah, that's that has legs. That has legs. Yeah, I think you read that and you want to read more. Yeah,
I hope so.
Good title, actually.
Well, I did wonder about whether to call it, and it may change. As I said, one chapter is all I've done. But I didn't know whether to call it The Perfect Candidate or The Perfect Candidate, and then in brackets, for murder, close brackets. But I think The Perfect Candidate is probably better.
Yeah, show, not tell. Right, Dave. Yes, that's right.
Right. I want to stay on the theme of science, but this time I'm going to switch gear from the world of molecular medicine to the world of astrophysics. So the micro to the macro. And this is going to be a poem, a very short poem, but I will try to outline the story of physics behind the creation. So there are a lot of very weighty words drawn from the world of physics. It makes sense to me, but I hope it makes sense to you. So the title of the poem is Making Sense of This Universe. I look up to the sky and I ask myself, is it only an empty space? Where does it begin? Where does it end? It all happened billions of years ago. A mass of energy no bigger than a pea exploded and inflated. Time, mass, and space created in one instant. Mass coalesced, into stars, planets, and galaxies. Billions, trillions, impossible to count. Each heavy with weight began spinning. Galaxies force space to bend and warp around. Light from distant stars that are long gone travels in empty space billions of miles. As I peer at the empty sky above me, I greet those photons, little messengers entering my eyes. For a moment, infinity, eternity, and I become one.
I like that.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes, I like that.
It ties in with our star theme.
Yes.
Yes. I'm not unaware of this. That's a good piece. I like that.
I mean, I love these Netflix and what was that space program, and I've actually taped quite a few of those. And every time you go through those, you understand you probably absorb 1%, 2% more. And over a period of time, you're just beginning to understand, what these complex themes in physics are. They're very complex. Essentially, they are mathematical equations. But the way that the physicists, tell the narrative, it does become sort of, they do make it simple to us. And you try to get a little bit of understanding of what is this world is about. What is this creation? How did we all come into existence? And I think this is the best story of around us. We can believe in.
Yeah.
I mean, whether you believe in religion, whether you believe in other things, that's your personal belief. But this belief in science, particularly the story of creation that has evolved over the last 100 years, is so fascinating and so gripping, And the more you try to understand, the more drawn you get into that.
Oh, yes. I mean, cosmology as it's developed, I mean, it is science, and a lot of it is hard science, hard mathematical science. But at the same time, there's an aspect of it which is mythological in its force, and I think that's what captivates us, isn't it? It's that kind of, it's almost a blending of cultures.
Absolutely. I mean, it amazes me how concepts are born in mathematics, mathematicians, equations, long before they are identified or visualized through a telescope or
Yes.
actual existence come into our sight. How mathematics actually predates everything that we get to see today.
There's some amazing examples of that. I mean, on the purely practical side, I mean, the existence of
a black hole, existence of black hole.
Black holes was predicted. Yeah. Yes, there was a mathematical prediction. Well, the existence of Neptune was predicted mathematically, and its exact location at a particular time was predicted, and you put a telescope in it and you see it. But there's another one where the maths predates the science, was Riemannian geometry in the middle of the 19th century. And it's just a mathematical game. It's a mathematical exercise, it's a way of producing a different sort of geometry that actually is consistent. And then suddenly we get general relativity, which would say the universe is actually described by Riemannian geometry. Where does that come from? It's amazing. So extraordinary. But I agree. I share your fascination with that, Dave.
I've got two granddaughters, and the older one, she's getting slowly drawn into the world of stars and etc. We got a telescope. We bought a telescope for her as the Christmas present this time, and she has just seen the moon through the telescope, and she's so excited. And I've just told her the story of how sun was born. And I sent her a sort of a vlog, a video recording of my sound. And although it was sort of full of sort of scientific words, she was fully gripped, and she sat there in full attention and listened to the whole thing. I mean, kids these days are very bright in general.
Yes.
It's the environment they live in. There's so much of information and stimulation they get from the media and television and Netflix, and also their school environment.
Yes. Yes. And it's great. I mean, of course, like any change in society, something is lost.
Yeah.
We find that children don't read as much as they did, which is a great pity. But yes, I mean, those are huge advantages. And what an example to show what advantages they are. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm just going to finish with one very, very small poem on our theme. The Stars at Night, Jane and Ann Taylor. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. In the dark blue sky you keep, and often through my curtain peep. You never shut your eye till the sun is in the sky. As your bright and tiny spark lights the traveller in the dark, though I know not what you are, twinkle, twinkle, little star. You can actually ask Alexa, don't say it too loud, because just in case you've got one, and she will sing it. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you especially for Sue and for her reading her competition-winning piece, Stars. And I'll look forward to seeing you all at the next probably Zoom meeting in March.
I guess so. Thanks for organising, Simone.
You're welcome.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, lovely to see everyone again.
Bye.
Bye.
No.
So good evening, everybody. So I lost.
I'm back.
But it's interesting what you're saying about the blasphemy. I can't even say it.
Blasphemy and sacrilege, yes.
Yeah, show not tell.
That's true. As the Flasher said when he sort of approached the lady and opened his lodge. No, we won't go there. We're not going to go there.
No, don't lower the tone, Tony.
I always do.
on your command.
Alexia, sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I haven't got it. Don't want it. Don't understand it.
Nor do I.